topic. And we talked ahead of time. And another thing that we wanted to touch on maybe this visit was some grief counseling.
Mm-hmm.
So tell me what you do, what you have offered for grief counseling, and, how that would work.
Okay. First of all, we do grief counseling is in so many areas that maybe not everyone thinks about, because generally we're going to think about death. And the grief that we go through during the death, the loss of someone, which is the bereavement, the loss. But then the grief comes as the reaction to that loss. So I'll just start with a couple things. For instance, I was speaking at a conference in Somerset last week, and after the conference, a lady came up to me whose husband, who is young, they have children at home still, who has recently been diagnosed with cancer, and it doesn't look well. He is going through treatments, of course, but she was just, you could see in her face and in her voice and the things that she was talking about that she was still in shock to know that this could happen to them was what I took from that. And so I just listened to her share about that, and which is really all she needed. I couldn't offer anything there other than an ear, because there was people around, but we did connect, and we have, I shared information. And that's what I generally try to do, is let someone know that, again, it goes back to trust, that they can trust me, that I'm willing to listen, and then maybe they will contact me later. So sometimes I run across people out in public that just might say something, and then in conversation they would be able to develop some kind of trust, and not even knowing that I do the coaching in the area that I do, the counseling coaching. So hoping that they will want to contact me and maybe do some further discussion. But that might be all she needed at that time. That might have been the only reason that we cross paths. And so I want to encourage other people, by saying all this, I do want to encourage other people to just know that we don't know what someone's dealing with when we might be at a grocery store. And we're always in a hurry. I'm the worst at that. Always in a hurry, trying to get somewhere quickly. But there might be somebody in line, or maybe somebody in the same aisle looking for something, and just a little, just a little acknowledgement of someone being there, or a hi, how are you? You just never know what you might gain from them. And it is a gain for me whenever I when I do encounter those times of someone who may not feel safe to open up to anybody, and they're in that moment, they're so lost in whatever they're dealing with. So we always, we go to a funeral home, and we know the evidence is there, and the understanding definitely is there of someone who is grieving over the loss of someone. Or my husband, being a pastor, will go to their home whenever someone has lost a loved one, and visit with them, and we want to be there for them. But there's so many other things. Divorce. Again, someone I've just recently talked with, I've been working with her for over a year now, and she was going through a very tough divorce. She did not want it, and the husband just suddenly, after 25 years, this is what's happening, and so that was a loss for her, and she was grieving because it was such a great loss. She is moving past that, but it's not always something that we say as coaches, counselors, or just individuals that can be there for someone. It's not always what we say. It's just listening and letting them share their pain, somewhat storytelling, just being able to tell their story and getting all that out, because otherwise, if they don't have anyone else safe to talk to, if we do all the talking, I'm going to back up just a minute, if we do all the talking and just assume we know what's going on, then they're not able to get it out. So we might not have to say anything at times, and just let them share and do all the talking so they can get it out of their minds, where it stirs around if it stays there and they stay stuck in that loss and that grief.
And, you brought up a point. We often think of grief as death, in association with death, but it's not always about, somebody dying. It's loss. It's about losing something. Even I've heard of people grieving over the loss of a job.
A job's a big one, yes.
Mm-hmm. And like you said, the divorce is a loss, and that wouldn't even have occurred to me to think about grief counseling in association with either of those two subjects. Mm-hmm. Do you find that, and this is a topic that some people are going to say, yes, I fully understand. Some people are going to say, and no, I don't get that at all. Do you find that you do much counseling grief counseling for loss of pets?
That actually crossed my mind whenever I was thinking last night that I'm coming this morning to talk on grief. Yes, definitely. Now, do I do it? That's not something common for me to do. But do I hear people talk a lot? And do I see on Facebook the go-to that we seem to find out what's going on these days, other than the radio? But
of course.
So yeah, but it's not that I don't understand that, because I know it's real, but that's not something that I've ever gone through. Mm-hmm. Some people are so extremely attached to their pets. Now, I grew up on a farm and we had all kinds of animals and I love them, but I've never been that attached to something that I remember grieving over it. But yes, I have seen people grieve over that, and that's not uncommon, and it's acceptable. Mm-hmm. Now, for someone, and I was sharing that that's not something I've been through, and I can't relate in a sense of I've lost this pet that was so special, and and I just couldn't seem to get over that loss. I haven't been through that particularly, other losses, but I still have to accept that that is very real for someone who is going through that. Just like a loss of employment. Maybe somebody else can just jump in and go somewhere else and look at it. Well, that was just meant to be. Look at the doors that's open. Where this next person, it was very traumatic for them. So yeah, loss of a pet. I do see that that's something that many people have a need, and it's probably not touched on a lot in our area anyway.
Yeah, and what do you think, Tajuana, just based on what you've seen? What is the difference in why can some people handle that and some people, like, my husband is one of he does not get attached. He loves his animals. He's like you, he loves the animals, but he's not going to grieve. He's not going to take a day off of work, when he loses his pet. Me, on the other hand, my daughter texted me when her cat died. She found her cat, had gotten run over, and she texted me at work, of all places to do that. And I cried for her cat,
Mm-hmm.
And so if I lost one of my pets, I might have to take a day off of work because, I do get attached. And what is the difference? Why do some people, you think, form that relationship where others can separate the fact that is an animal? It is not a human being.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'll just be perfectly honest. I think there's so many different reasons that and different things that in the way that we're wired. That's probably what I'll go with. The way that we're wired, each individually. Some are maybe those people are more affectionate. I don't know, but there's also different types, different categories of grief. So along with the way that we're wired and just that. Things are more meaningful to one person where they're not to another person, which goes back to our personalities and our characteristics. But then there's grief like her cat died. I'm assuming your daughter was not expecting this cat to die, and it was a sudden death. And so that would be somewhat of I'm going to put it in the category of a chronic grief. She wasn't expecting it. She was very attached to it. And so chronic grief would be, for instance, if somebody lost a loved one and they died suddenly and it was so unexpected and, life was just great, and with the snap of a finger, something changed. And so to your daughter, snap of a finger, something changed. And, or for someone, for instance, I counseled with a wife a few years ago whose husband, I won't share all the details, but he had taken his own life, and she found him, and just after it had happened, and her children were young, and so that chronic death is going to hang on more so than something that is expected, which would be the anticipatory grief. So we were anticipating it. The lady who has been diagnosed with cancer that I mentioned, and many people can relate to that, they have time to start adjusting to it. So that would be the one of the main reasons that I would say is that it was unexpected and it was more traumatic. And so that chronic grief is going to be situations that are more traumatic, and you didn't expect it, so you didn't have time to prepare for it. So you have to go through those stages of loss, which I can talk about that also.
Well, we will definitely have to have you back to talk about that, because we need to get into a little more of that, because I think that's important. And you know, I can understand from that perspective. I can understand why my daughter would grieve. I don't really understand why I reacted quite the way I did. But
well,
and
you hurt for your daughter also.
You know, and I think that was part of it.
Because
when I called her, she was crying, and so that made me cry. And
Yes.
But there was another time where I actually ran over one of my cats on the way to work, and for hours at work I just couldn't stop crying, and I didn't even like the cat. Didn't even like this cat. But I could not stop crying because it had maybe if somebody else had run over it, I don't know, but because I had run over it. But we definitely need to have you back, Tajuana, and talk about the stages of grief. I don't think we had quite enough time to get into everything today that I would like to have devoted to that
Sure.
conversation. But
I'd love to.
we will do that. Or we won't, because tomorrow will be my last day. But Tess will need to have you back and have that conversation
I'd
with
love
you.
to join you then, Tess.
Yes. Thank you so much for coming
Thank you
in
for
this morning,
having me.
Tajuana. I appreciate it. And how can we contact you if we need some more information on grief counseling?
Okay, my number is 270-625-5926. I can be reached on Facebook, Tajuana Davis. That's Tajuana Davis. Or my email is the same, Tajuana Joe Davis 18 at AOL.com.
Thank you so much for joining us this
Thank
morning,
you.
Tajuana. You're listening to Coffee Talk on WPKY, and we've got David Brown joining us in just a minute.